Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm director of Blockly at the Raspberry Pi Foundation.
And I'm Mary Beth, and I'm the engineering manager of the Blockly team.
And you may recognize us from some previous events that we've been at or that you've been at. If this is your first time here, welcome. And it's wonderful to have you here. So we get to do the keynote. This is the part that I am really excited about and slightly dread all year, every year. So first off, obviously, welcome to Cambridge. And there's a joke in here that I'm sure multiple people will make because we were in Cambridge in the US previously. Now we're Cambridge here. This doesn't not make it confusing at all. But I'm very excited to be here. And on the agenda, actually, the first thing I'm going to talk about is the fact that we're here and kind of that move over to here and make sure that everyone understands how that happened and what happened there. After that, I get to talk about the accessibility work that we've been doing for the last multiple years. And then we'll go over to the roadmap. And we'll have some time at the end for questions. So, these slides, logo, possibly aligned, possibly not. It turns out it's very hard to align things when you have 2 lines of text in one and the block. Like, it's just incredible. Obviously, Blockly has just moved over to the Raspberry Pi Foundation, and I say just, that's in November. And I announced that in October of last year, so right before we moved, and I know it was a surprise to hopefully most people, actually. There were only a few people who knew that this was coming. So I want to talk a little bit about Blockly at Google and kind of what it looked like for the first while at Google and kind of how that led to us moving. So Blockly was founded in 2011. Neil Fraser built it as a one-man shop. Neil is here, I believe. Okay, Neil will be back. You will see him. Neil Fraser built Blockly originally, and that was 2011. And over time, that actually grew into a team of multiple people. And so I actually joined the Blockly team in, I believe, 2014. So I've been doing this for a while. And it kind of grew, and it became a team that actually owned this product and started to do kind of broader Blockly things. We were still really heavily an engineering team the majority of the time, which you can see in our documentation sometimes. And over time, Blockly really was adopted at scale. So it went from this library that was used for just a few things to kind of the default way that people would do block-based programming if they were like, I want to build something block-based and I'm not sure how to make the blocks move around on the page. It's not the only one. I can tell you a lot about all the others because they're super cool, but Blockly did get adopted at scale and really get used a lot. And part of that also was actually the move to Blockly being used for Scratch 3.0, which was one of the projects that I worked on way back when I was a young engineer. So over time, there's this question that came up, basically every year, every other year, and it was, should we have a foundation? Should we have something that was kind of a home for Blockly that was outside of Google? Because Blockly as an open source project, could follow in the tracks of plenty of other open source projects and have foundations. And there's some pros to this. In particular, being able to say, we work on Blockly, rather than saying, I spent a bit of time as the manager making sure that my managers understood why Blockly was important. Just a little bit of time over the years. Cooperation. So Blockly, we actually work very closely with folks, including at Microsoft. And this is actually a little bit of an exception sometimes, I think. People are often surprised when I'm like, no, we're not fighting over this. We're not fighting over who gets to use our stuff. Like, we are working together. But that cooperation is a little bit easier if you can put everything under the name of a foundation. And also fundraising. There's, again, pros and cons. Being part of Google meant we had funding through Google, but also meant that if Google said no, that was it. There was no alternative. We couldn't go turn around and try to fundraise other ways. So those are the pros of moving to a foundation. But every time this came up, there were also kind of a lot of cons. The big one, where would we go? Figuring that out, that's not a small question. Funding-wise, question was, could we make up the equivalent amount of funding in fundraising? And I know there are folks here who have done fundraising and know how big of a question that is. And then the other bit of it is that it's just kind of, there's a lot of instability involved in making that sort of move. So every couple of years this would come up, we'd talk about it, and then it was like, no, now is not the time to do it. And in 2024, that conversation came up again, and I was thinking about it, and it suddenly seemed like actually this was okay. I had answers to all of these questions in a way that I'd never had before. So where would we go? Well, actually, there were multiple exciting options for where we could go. We were looking around, and it's like, would we join an existing foundation? I said I was willing to create a new foundation if I needed to. So we had options. And we were at that point within google.org, and so we were able to say, can we work together with google.org for funding to make sure we have funding as we go out the door? So rather than a cliff, we're able to actually have a couple years of runway. And the other part is that I brought this as a proposal to my VP, and I said, I want to take Blockly and move with it. Like, I am willing to leave Google in order to do this, and I'm going to try to convince other people that they also want to do this. Which, by the way, hard conversations to have sometimes, and I pulled it off with different levels of tact per person. I think I gave at least one person a minor heart attack while doing this. So I brought this to my VP in 15-minute office hours with no warning whatsoever. I just showed up and said, hey, I want to do this, and I want some funding for it. And she said, that's an interesting idea. Have you talked to the Raspberry Pi Foundation? So then I showed up and talked to the Raspberry Pi Foundation, who had equally no idea what was coming and had a similar experience. But I started looking around at the foundation, and I started looking at the mission, and I started looking at the vision, and I was seeing these things that really aligned with how we think about how Blockly is used. And I was looking at the long-term goals, and there's teaching, there's inspiring, there's also research, and that particularly to me is really interesting, is to look for what are the best kind of research-backed ways to do this work. And when I was looking at the Raspberry Pi Foundation, one of the things that I saw was they understand what it means to build something that's sort of infrastructure that then gets used by lots of other people. And that's one of the hallmarks of Blockly, is we build this thing, we try to make it really good, we try to make it really powerful and mostly do the right thing in most cases, but also we then put it out there and we say, you folks can do what you want with it. We'll try to support you, tell us how you want to use this. And looking at the foundation, I saw a willingness to balance that desire to do really, really deep, good work with the desire to let people take that work and do what they needed to do with it. So after that, super easy. Just, minor proposal, some negotiation, nothing complicated there. No lawyers there were some lawyers. There were some lawyers and a lot of lawyers, lots of negotiation. That kind of ate my life for a while. And then we did the announcement basically all at once. Just said, all right, this is it. We're moving in, a month. And then as part of that announcement, we also said, it's not just that Blockly is moving, it's also multiple people from the team are going to also move with Blockly. And then graduation. Partly because I really see this as a graduation. So we were in one place that was supporting us. That was a really good place to be for a long time. We learned a lot there. And then they supported us in saying, now it's time to do the next thing. Let's move on. But it wasn't a out the door with you. It really was, this is the next step. We're going to change how we're approaching this. And I made the t-shirts. Extremely limited edition t-shirts. So what have we done since we moved over here? It's been about 6 months. First thing we've done is just hiring. So hiring back up and getting to where we're fully staffed and we're happy with where we are. The next thing is that I wanted to do this move while we had a really solid roadmap, and in fact, while we had work that was in progress, because that allowed us to keep momentum as we moved through this. We didn't have that pause of, wait, who are we and what do we do? But that means we've been working really hard on accessibility while we've been managing this transition. And we're going to talk more about that. Lots of work went out there. And collaboration. So we're starting to talk to other folks within the Raspberry Pi Foundation. Again, I'm excited about that research side. There also are curriculum teams, design teams, so we're actually getting to go talk to them and pull in their deep experience and knowledge around education. Would like to say that we have the Blockly team over here, and if you are on the Blockly team, please wave. All right, the rest of you, please look around and be like, I'm asking you questions later today. So we have some folks who moved over from Google with us. We have some folks who are new to the team, and we are super excited about that. And this is the team now. So that's all the introduction. That's the how we got here, why we're here. That's why we are here in Cambridge. And now I get to talk about accessibility. And the starting point on this, whenever I go to talk about accessibility in block programming, I really want to take a step back and say, why do we do block programming at all? Like, what makes this useful? What are the features of block programming that are effective for education? What are the features of block programming that are effective for industry? And there are a couple things that show up over and over again. One is when you build blocks, you can build useful abstractions. So you can say, I want a block that is a for loop that has all these bits and bobs in it, rather than saying, I need to build this out of every single, like all the syntax for it. You can set good default values. So we have those shadow blocks that you can use to set default values, and you can change those. And then there's certain mistakes that's hard to make. Everyone knows the experience of typos. We all have tons of workarounds for them. People who are new to programming don't have as many workarounds and are exponentially more frustrated. So blocks help with that. And then the toolbox, I actually think, is a really powerful tool that we don't always talk about, which is that you can support exploration because you can actually show someone like what it is that you can do, and they can look around in a way that's very different from getting sent over to the documentation page and starting to scroll through that list of, function signatures. So that's why blocks. And so then the next question is, okay, blocks are cool. You said that they're useful. I think that those features are really useful for folks with visual impairments. They're useful for folks with motor impairments. Or put another way, there's nothing about having a visual impairment or a motor impairment that changes the usefulness of those features. And given that, I think it's important that we make sure that that's something that's accessible to everyone. Why do that work in the Blockly library? Well, a couple things. One is there's some pretty big regulatory requirements that are coming into effect for educational software, and Blockly is used heavily in educational software, although not exclusively. The other thing is that there's a common need across multiple products here, and that's really where Blockly excels. That's where we try to be, is look at the thing that multiple people are doing and maybe are doing in just slightly different ways where everyone has reinvented the wheel and it's a little bit bumpy, and we look for whether we can just do that and share that out with folks. So the first question is, what are the things about block-based programming environments, specifically in this case, educational block-based programming environments, that can cause problems? What are the things that are barriers? And just gonna add a note down here at the bottom, there's a link. So I just finished a master's in education. So this is a summary of my thesis right here. But I can assure you, there's a lot of stuff behind that if you want to go read it. So barriers for this. One of the big sets of barriers is actually social barriers. So looking around at the research, looking at the literature, I saw looking around that there's a strong desire to use the same tools as the other kids in the classroom. And again, this is in particular kids, and then also if you look at teenagers, there's this point where it becomes like, yes, I want to not look different or work differently here. But that's not just about, there's a piece of it that's identity, but there's also a piece of it that is collaboration. And I believe pretty strongly that programming, and particularly programming in the classroom, is a social thing. And so it's important to have the same tools because you want someone to be able to say, hey, come over here, check out this project. I made it so that if you click on this, the sprite jumps and then it honks 3 times. Like, that's an important thing to share. That's super important. And you need that other person to be able to say, well, actually, I think it should do a kazoo sound on the 3rd sound instead. And to do that, it's the same tools. In the same way, teachers are better able to support students if they're using the same tools as the other students in the classroom. There are places for unique tools. My goal isn't to displace those. Rather, the goal is to make it so that if someone wants to use Scratch, wants to use Microbit, MakeCode, they have the option to do it. They get to choose. There are technical barriers here, which we will spend a lot of time talking about because that's where we did spend a lot of work on that. Navigating code is hard. Navigating code is not as simple as like just up and down, although we tried to make it feel simple. Editing code is hard in a completely different way. What are the valid values? What can you do with this? How do you know what you can do there? And then there's actually just a technical layer of accessibility with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which you will hear people repeatedly talk about in this. We saw physical limitations. So we have barriers. We have the spatial layout, and that really relies on vision. There's also the fact that drag and drop actually relies on manual dexterity in some pretty significant ways. So we were looking at this and we were like, are there ways we can get around this? And then finally, there's something about this that is particular to educational block-based programming environments that's different from for other block-based programming environments, and that is that kids start using Blockly at an age where they aren't good at using computers. You cannot assume that they know how to use their assistive technology, but more than that, you actually can't assume they know how to type. And so you start in, you have to be able to kind of meet them where they are and teach them those skills or those concepts while teaching them tons of other stuff. So before 2024, we Blockly as a team had looked at accessibility, we'd talked about it, but we really saw it as a concern of the developers who were using Blockly. They needed to do this, we would support them if they told us what it is they needed. And in 2024, that changed. And that's partly, took a look around, looked at the research and said, this isn't quite, like, it's not moving forward. There isn't someone saying, this is the right way to do it. It's still very muddy. But we looked around and created the Blockly Accessibility Fund because we saw that there really was a desire to work on this. People needed funding to do that. And so that was actually a google.org program that has funded a bunch of programs, and we'll be talking about those throughout this. And that's also when the Blockly team started working on keyboard navigation. 2025, at the summit last year, we announced the keyboard navigation work that we'd done. All of these projects continued. Some of them started to bear fruit in terms of resources or things that you can use in your classroom or professional development or research. And we as a team worked on screen reader support during that time. Going forward, we're sort of turning a page here. We've finished off with implementing that screen reader support in a way that we think is tested, is valid. The next thing is actually making sure that that gets used, and that's going to rely on all of you as well to make sure that that gets to teachers and that gets to students. So what did we do for this? First off, we made a cursor. So cursor is a fairly common idea in programming. It tells you where you are on the page. It tells you what the target of your actions is, the target of your key presses. And we made it so that it tracks focus in the Blockly workspace. And then we implemented keyboard shortcuts so that anything you wanted to do in Blockly, you could do with the keyboard just as well as you could do with the mouse. And so this takes away that kind of, you have to have the manual dexterity side of it, and it also breaks apart, like creates certain primitives that are important for the screen reader side of this. And then, a year of work over here in terms of implementing the correct labels for all the possible cursor positions and all the other bits that we needed to do. Again, not going to go into that in detail because we have tons of talks about that where people can tell you much more. But another piece of this is that we tested this in the classroom. And so I want to say thank you, especially to the Microbit folks for all of your help with this, and also to the Neil Squire folks for your help with this, because I would not be confident releasing this if I couldn't say we've tested this in classrooms, and we've tested it with kids with visual impairments, we've tested it with fully sighted kids, we've tested it with teachers, and we know that this works, and we know that there were bits that didn't work, and they gave us feedback about it, and we changed it. So, assuming my video loads, which it may or may not do, because that is how this works, I'm going to give you a demo of keyboard navigation and editing of values. There's a lot of information that's on the page at once, so you don't need to see all of this, but we have what the key presses are over there, and you can see that kind of moving the cursor around, which is the highlight on here, and moving around between blocks and changing values just with the keyboard. And in particular, it's possible actually to change some fairly complex values. So somewhere on here, there's going to be a piano keyboard that pops up. And the fact that you can change that is pretty cool. Wait for it. All right, so that's a demo of the keyboard navigation. And then the next question was, how do we actually transition from having keyboard navigation over to having screen reader support? And at first glance, this is actually a pretty easy thing. You just say where you are. You have the cursor, you know where you are, you just say that. The thing about screen readers is that they take a string and they turn that into audio or they turn that into Braille, they output that information. But now we have a hard question. How would you describe this block? You might say it's a repeat block. You might say repeat 10 times do. Right? And that would work if someone already knows what you're talking about. how would you describe this block? And in particular, how do you describe this block to someone who hasn't done block programming before, who's getting exposed to this for the first time? And I'm not going to give you the answer to that because it takes a lot of text and a lot of thinking, but I think the really key thing to see here is when we present blocks, we present a lot of information in parallel. We present information with the shape of the block, we present information with the color of the block, and also with its relationship to other blocks on the page. And that's information about what it currently does, but that's also information about what you can do with it. And so the question was, how do we translate that information? So I'm going to have a demo that has even more information on the page at once, because in this demo, we are going to have down here a visual output of what VoiceOver shows, or what VoiceOver will say. And so this is the same navigation and editing, except that you can actually see down here what the output will be. And in particular here, one of the things that's going to be shown is that you can insert blocks, and we can say where it is that you're going to insert a block. And you can also move blocks around, which raises an entire different set of questions, because you're like, where am I putting this block? Do I describe it as before this block? Do I describe it as after this block? Do I say it's before the blue block? You know, all of these things come into play here. Okay, so that's all kind of what we've been doing, what we've been up to. What this means concretely for you is we have these features. They're coming out in Blockly v13. And we have standard keyboard shortcuts that we're enabling by default, which means that if you use v13, and you don't do anything, you're going to have the same keyboard shortcuts as the other people who are using Blockly v13. And that's really important for transfer between these, and also because we tried really hard to make sure that those shortcuts could in some way be connected to general how you use a computer, not just specific to Blockly in particular. We have commitments from partners to actually use this, and some of you have been dealing with a lot of, growing pains as you've been working through the updates with us. We appreciate all of the feedback, especially in the form of bug reports, that have helped us to make this better. But we have commitments to use it and also to communicate it out, to talk to teachers, to talk to users about this. And then we have resources, best practices, and research that's coming out of the Blockly Accessibility Fund that is also there to be shared, so that everyone can build on that same foundation. Before I pass it off to Maribeth, I really want to say a thank you to a lot of the people who were involved in this, in particular, the Microbit Educational Foundation. I'm gonna make everyone look at you. Please put your hands up. And they have a youth panel that they've been working with, the Youth Ideation Panel, who are a group of blind or visually impaired students who were willing to sit down and go through prototypes and give feedback and say, no, this isn't how you should do it, or yes, this part works, and that has been invaluable. So I want to also say a thank you to them for that work. Thank you to everyone who is an Accessibility Fund recipient and has been working on this, because I've been able to pull from all the bits and bobs that people are doing, also for my thesis. And there are a lot of people here who have worked on Blockly in some form, past or present, and I want to say thank you also to all of you. You know who you are. If you've worked on Blockly, you worked especially on this accessibility work, thank you. And with that,
thanks, Rachel. So I'm going to dive into the details of the v13 release, which I know you are all on the edge of your seat waiting to find out when this will release. When can you get your hands on it? The answer is next week. We're putting the finishing touches on, and right now we have a beta out. It's actually beta.8. So it's a really solid beta. There won't be any more breaking changes. You can try this now and you can give us your feedback. We want your feedback. We want to make it as good as we can before we publish the full release, but that will be out in the next week. Followed by the plugins. So all of our plugins, we have many of them now. They'll be updated to be fully accessible as well. So the fields will be updated to be keyboard and screen reader accessible, and our other plugins such as Toolbox Search will be updated to work as well. And we will follow this up with point releases with additional bug fixes and quality of life improvements. So there won't be any more breaking changes this year, but there will be better, as we get feedback from you all, someone says this label is confusing, or, all of my students they didn't know how to use this shortcut. We'll be refining in response to user feedback and developer feedback. So we're not done. We want to hear your feedback, but we also promise that we will not break you. Once you update to V13, you're good. Till next summit. So to talk more about the technical details, of course, we have all this accessibility work that Rachel gave us an intro on. You're going to hear a lot more about it for the next 2 days. But that wasn't all that we've did. We've done many, many, many bug fixes. What's our bug count, Aaron? So we were over 500. We've whittled that bug list down, including some very old ones. So Aaron's going to tell you about his adventure through our issue list later today. We've also added web component support, which is something that many of you have been asking us for years now. V13 will work with web components. We've also added new sounds. There's a fun new sound when you drop a block on the workspace. And if you are in this room and you're responsible for dealing with cores, I'm sorry, and we've updated the default media location, so you should care about that. If you don't know what cores is, then you don't care. We've done some other smaller touch-ups and fixes. So we've gotten rid of all of our use of the built-in browser window.alert. We have custom modals now, so the experience is more consistent for everyone across browsers and resistant to the future Chrome deciding they don't want window.alert anymore. Another project that we're working on that is a little bit more internal to the team, so if you contribute to the Blockly code base, then you care a little bit more about this, is the monorepo. So we've had the Blockly repository, and we've had the Blockly samples repository. And Blockly samples contains not just examples, but also our code labs and our plugins. Having those separate has caused us some friction over the years. What we're doing is moving the core library, the plugins, and all of our documentation into the same repository. We can update them all at the same time. It'll reduce breakages in our plugins. It'll make it easier for us to keep the documentation up to date. So that's an ongoing process that we're working on. One of our new team members, Liz, we hired specifically to work on our front-end infrastructure projects. So Liz will get to tell you more about the monorepo at the next summit, I hope. We're keeping Blockly samples, so all of the standalone examples will exist over there. And another thing that we've heard feedback over the years is if you're using plugins, and especially multiple plugins, it's difficult to know which version of the plugins you should be using, especially if you're not on the very latest version of Blockly. So you might be using V12 of Blockly and V2 of some theme and V7 of Workspace Search. None of them match. It's difficult to keep everything up to date. What we're doing with V13 is all of the plugins will have the same version number as the version of Blockly. So all you need to do, update Blockly and then update your plugins to match the exact same version number. This is a popular format that other open source core libraries and plugins use. So we're matching the industry standard, and I think this will be a lot easier for you all to keep up to date with your plugins. Another thing we've been working on is moving off of the Google infrastructure. So if you visited our documentation in the past week or so, you might have noticed we launched our new documentation site. So docs.blockly.com is the new home. All of your bookmarks should redirect to the correct place. If they don't, you can file an issue on GitHub and we can fix that. But all of our developer docs are here. Our reference docs are here, and then we've also moved our code labs here and made them easier to organize. It should be easier to understand in which order to do the code labs. We've also added documentation, of course, on the new accessibility features that we've added to the library. But another thing we've done is document the best practices that we've learned over the past year throughout our user testing. So what we've done is, for as many things as we can, the library itself has taken care of what we can to make it easy for you to implement accessibility best practices. But there are some things that the library can't do. We can't make the rest of your page accessible. We can't write your curriculum onboarding for you. But we have learned what works and what doesn't work, and we've written down those best practices. So on the documentation site, when we launch V13, you'll also find some new resources for using all of this, not just technically, but also to help onboard new users. Another important feature of making your product accessible is declaring that your project is accessible. So now schools and governments are starting to require an accessibility conformance report. And this is how you say exactly how accessible your project is. We've started a template that you can use as the basis for your Blockly-based applications accessibility conformance report. So Rachel put a ton of work into this to analyze which parts of the Blockly application are accessible, how do they meet the guidelines. You can use that as a starting point for your own ACR. So that's what we've been working on for the past year, and now I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about what we're going to be working on for the next year. So throughout these summits, you might have heard us talk about how Blockly goes through cycles of expansion, adding new features, and then stabilizing. So we just, as soon as we release V13, we'll have exited this period of a lot of expansion. We've added a ton of new features, new keyboard shortcuts, making the library better, and now we're focusing on shoring up the library and the developer experience. So what's next is adding even more tests, giving some love to our plugins, which have admittedly been a little bit neglected over the past year as we've focused on accessibility. We've also hired a developer relations engineer, Zoe. So Zoe, yeah. Zoe's going to be helping us improve our code labs and our getting started documentation, and also improving the way that we hear feedback from you all and work together with you all. So that's the immediate stabilization period that we're entering into. And just to give you a little preview of the next expansion period that we see coming up next, we're going to be looking at teacher and curriculum tools. I shared a little bit about this at the previous summit. Basically, over the past few years, the team has made it easier to follow the technical best practices for using Blockly. So we have the create package script. So if you're starting a new Blockly project, you can run a script and you get like a template, and that template is going to follow our best practice recommendations from a technical perspective. But what we haven't done is make it easy to follow what we've learned of how to follow best practices from a curriculum standpoint or from a block design standpoint. I'm not going to call out any of your blocks here, but we've learned over the years like what makes a good block and what makes a bad block. So what we're going to be looking at is how can we as a team make it easier to share that knowledge and to build good blocks, for example. We're also, of course, going to be looking at AI and visual programming. In the immediate term, that is looking at research into how the two interact. So more to come on that later. So if you are, I hope that you're all excited about the accessibility work that we've been doing. There's going to be many more talks about the accessibility work specifically. So there's some here, but we also have many other great talks throughout the summit that are not all about accessibility. So we have a lot of content for you. We're really excited, and we really hope you enjoy what we've put together for you this year. So thank you. So we'll open it up for questions now. If you could raise your hand, Joe will bring you a mic. This could be about our roadmap, about what we've done, about any of the accessibility work, about the move to the foundation. We want your questions. How much time do we have, Joe?
10 minutes.
Okay.
I have a question about the accessibility work, which may be too technical. If another talk covers it, please just tell me shut up. But I'm curious, you mentioned the toolboxes like being one of the things that is really important for block-based editors. And that kind of recognition seems like it would be very difficult if you weren't looking at the screen and able to recognize the thing over there that is full of components you can drag over. So can you talk a bit about how you tackle that problem.
Yeah, I think the critical thing is that the toolbox in a lot of cases is assemblies of blocks. So for instance, that a for loop that has shadow blocks in it. And so it's really those assemblies that I think are kind of the exploratory side of it, where someone has just every single block that they've got in the toolbox in order by, alphabetical order. That's a little less useful for exploration. And so with the accessibility stuff, you can hit T, you can open the toolbox and now you can move around in it and you're getting the same readout as you would otherwise have. We also filed under best practices, like broadly, I'm telling people you should have a search in your toolbox of some form. One of the really interesting questions has been, should you make the toolbox only have the blocks that are legal for your current position? And the answer was no, because that means that someone cannot perceive the things that they cannot use. So we've been playing around with that. Hopefully that answers that question.
Say your name before your question.
Thanks, Joe. Hi, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Russell. I'm from the MakeCode team. I have a question for Rachel and maybe Phil, too. So you've said all the ways that Blockly will not change moving over from Google to the Raspberry Pi Foundation. But what are the ways that you think it will change?
Yeah, so I keep mentioning the research side because I'm super excited about that, but also this curriculum tools side. Being able to work with the other groups at the foundation, I think, is really key. In particular, like the foundation has the Hello World magazine, which actually goes out to teachers, for instance, and goes out to curriculum folks, and being able to speak directly there, I think, is important. It's actually easier for us, I think, to do the sort of advocacy that we've been discussing and to talk about the importance of this stuff when we're at the Raspberry Pi Foundation versus when we were part of Google as a whole, which needed to be very careful about what we said with the Google name. Here, we're much more targeted to what the foundation is doing, and so it's much easier to make that align. So I think you'll see a lot of that in the communication side, how we talk about the work. The teacher and curriculum tool side, the AI and visual programming side, both of those, again, are under Explore, but exploring that doesn't just mean just the team itself exploring, it really means we get to work across the foundation. He says what I said, we're good. I saw there's someone over there with a question.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Timo. We have like 2 roadmap questions, maybe, or maybe I can hijack that as an invitation to come talk to me about that later. So first would be canvas rendering performance. So we have some canvases with like 10,000 plus blocks, and we see that sometimes the browser has trouble with rendering performance, and we'd like to understand, is that something on the roadmap maybe? And the second thing, rather like feature-wise, we'd love to see native support for like Google Slides style Blockly canvases, like having multiple people working on the same workspace at the same time. So also just a question, is that something on the roadmap maybe, or?
Okay, so the 2 questions there. I'll mostly answer them and then point at Aaron for one of them. On the performance side, I would say this is one of the things, also Joe is looking for the mic back. On the performance side, this is one of those kind of, as we do that expansion and then that stabilization, there's always this like, maybe the performance gets worse, but also like the browsers change out from underneath us. So every couple of years, part of our stabilization pass is actually to go look at performance and say, what's changed? Are there SVG optimizations we did that are now actually actively making it worse? Aaron is going to be working on that. I know that he has opinions about this.
Yes, definitely this is something we're aiming to look at as part of the pretty short future roadmap. To Rachel's point, we've made a lot of changes. Those naturally have performance consequences in some cases. I would say I think it is entirely reasonable for us to aim to have thousands of blocks be a thing that works well. Thousands is not a number that computers should struggle with in 2026. It is quite a lot of blocks. Obviously, there are some, user implications from having blocks workspaces of that size, but there are situations where that's something that people are trying to do, and it is something that we feel should be possible. So yeah, I have been looking at some things related to how we're doing SVG, the number of DOM elements that we actually have on screen, how that interfaces with browsers, and that is going to be an active place of focus in the next few months. And we do hope to make some improvements there. I would say when you encounter things that do not perform well, please do file bugs about that. It's very useful to know, particularly if it's a specific browser combination or some, particular like Zoom is having, lots of trouble in Edge or something. That's very useful information, lets us focus our investigation and try and tackle those specific problems. But yeah, it is an area of focus. We know, we care about it, and we wanted to make it better. So thanks.
And I will say, if you have 10,000 blocks, I'm going to say no. Like, there is a limit on this. There is a point at which I will say, from a usability perspective, I agree that the blocks should slide around smoothly, but I think there are other things going on here that need fixed.
Well, it also has been a regression, just to follow on with the Evan patent from App Inventor, and we also have, sometimes workspaces with 10,000 plus blocks. Chrome, I know, had a regression and still has a regression in the SVG rendering, but that's not my question. My actual question is about the keyboard nav, I guess, and how have you had to change the move semantics at all? Because in drag and drop, when you drag a block, you also drag all of the next blocks attached to it.
Yep.
But when you show the cursor, you're showing just the one block and not the fact that all the other ones below it would also necessarily be quote unquote selected.
Right.
So
Can I answer the second question over here and then come?
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yes. For the real-time collaboration, which is what we've called that, the Blockly event stream is actually designed to support real-time collaboration, and that's something that Neil, you can talk to Neil about as well. But basically, like, it is designed to support that. A lot of the work for doing real-time collaboration is actually what you're doing on the server side, which is again one of the bits where Blockly doesn't do it. So we don't have a plugin that is Blockly real-time collaboration because, again, I don't think we can reasonably say what someone does on their server. We do have a demo that's what we call the bent pipe demo that's just like, it's the mirror demo and it moves things back and forth between for echoing it. But you can actually follow up on that. And I know that App Inventor has done so in the past, so I would encourage you to talk to each other about this.
Yes, and I'll also say we've been working on trying to do this with YJS as a backend, so I'm happy to chat.
And then Maribeth on keyboard?
Yeah, so the move semantics, with the mouse, if you drag one block, you'll also drag all the blocks attached next to it. I think we now generally believe this might have been a mistake to implement this way with the mouse, but it's too late to change it because that's how Blockly works. And if we change that, it would be very confusing. If you want to move just a single block, I don't know how many like students that use the Blockly products actually know this, but you can hold down Alt, yeah, or Shift. See, I don't know. You can hold down some key and move only the single block. For keyboard users, what we found in user testing was that it was very confusing to move a whole stack because the whole stack isn't highlighted. So the default is that you will move just the single block that's selected, but if you hold down Shift or Alt, then you will move the whole stack. So it is reversed, and that is one of those situations where Ben is going to talk about our principles for how we design this, and our goal is to be consistent between mouse and keyboard behavior, but there were some situations where it didn't make sense to be consistent because it was too confusing, and that's one of them. So it's something we found, it worked better this way in user testing.
I think we have time for probably either one or two more questions.
Hi, I'm Roger Oliveira from Barcelona, Spain. And I don't have any question, but just want to congratulate Blockly and all the people working on accessibility because it's amazing. And thank you because we were dreaming about this. Like 40 years ago, we said to Scratch that you need to make this accessible. And they said, we need Blockly to do this. So I am so happy that we are now, 4 years later, talking about all this. I know it's not easy, it's a lot of effort behind, but I'm very happy mainly to allow and to not to leave anyone behind. No, it's, all these children that cannot participate, and in the next months and with all your work will be able to feel included, to participate, to engage with all these amazing tools that Blockly allows. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Rachel. So Srini, I'm from Haro Code Club. So first of all, as Roger mentioned, very good work, and thanks for making Blockly accessible. My question is like, I've spoken to Emma and the team Microbit. I'm not sure whether Scratch Foundation does something for accessibility, but how does it align with among various organizations with what good work you're doing in
So-
making it accessible?
Yeah, so I think the question here is how like Blockly is doing this, how does this then get deployed? How do other people do it? Is there alignment? That's where I started 2.5 years ago with the question of what we were going to do about this. Is I started by asking a bunch of the organizations that use Blockly, like, if we solved this problem, would you be able to use it? And would you use it? And there's also CSTA, I'm pointing at you because you have a CSTA shirt, there's a CSTA working group on this, and I've been working with them for that 2.5 years. So this really is, like, I've been setting the groundwork for this to work. Scratch recently updated to V12, and so they're going to actually be able to pull this in as well. And so we're talking to them about it. So for all the major partners, we've been kind of having those conversations, really working on this, and really also trying to convince them of things like use the default keyboard shortcuts. And we're taking feedback if there are problems. If it's like, I can't do this, we want to know how. So I'm optimistic that the combination of having actively worked with them and having good defaults means that this is going to be broadly rolled out. And that's also why my year looks like advocacy going forward from this. I'll be talking about this a lot. All right.